They say that when you see your doppelganger, it's an omen of death, a warning. But in the small, humid town of Oakhaven, a man named Elias learned that there is something much, much worse than dying. There is the horror of being replaced, piece by piece, by something that doesn't quite understand how to be solid. Something that wants to borrow you, until there's nothing left. Before we dive into Elias's descent into madness, I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen a doppelganger? Tell your story in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're going deep into the uncanny today. Let's begin. Elias was a man of bone-deep habits. A lean, sharp man in his mid-30s, he lived in a narrow Victorian house that seemed to be constantly exhaling the dust of a century. Oakhaven itself felt perpetually damp, the humidity sticking to your ribs, making every movement feel heavy. Every day was the same for Elias. 6 a.m. coffee, a long day at the local archives, and a quiet evening until bed. His uniform was simple: practical trousers, a pressed shirt, and his favorite charcoal sweater, the one with the distinctive frayed left cuff. The first glitch happened on a Tuesday. Elias was in the kitchen, back turned to the door, scrubbing a cast iron skillet. The rhythmic scrape of metal on metal filled the quiet house. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A figure passed the doorway, moving toward the stairs. It wore his sweater. It had his height, his build. "Hello," Elias called out, his voice thin, his heart performing a slow, sickening roll in his chest. Silence. The house felt suddenly colder. He walked into the hallway. Empty. The front door was locked from the inside. He checked every room, his pulse thumping in his ears. Nothing. He tried to convince himself it was a floater in his eye, a trick of the evening light. But then, near the stairs where the figure had disappeared, he found them. A trail of wet, oily footprints. They didn't lead to a room. They didn't lead to a window. They led directly into a solid wall and vanished. 2 days later, the humidity in Oakhaven hadn't let up, but the rain had turned into a relentless downpour. Elias sat across from his friend Julian, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. His knuckles were white as he gripped a mug of coffee. Julian's voice was barely audible over the rain hitting the roof. "Elias," Julian began, his voice trembling, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not call me crazy." "I saw you," Julian corrected, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "Last night. It was coming down in sheets, total blackout weather. I looked out my kitchen window and saw a figure standing dead center in my backyard. Just standing there, getting drenched, staring straight up at my kitchen window." Elias frowned. "In your yard?" "Julian, I haven't left my house after dark in a week." Julian took a shuddering breath. "I thought it was you. I really did." I opened the back door and yelled out, "Elias? What are you doing? You okay? You need help." The figure didn't answer. It just stood there. So I stepped out onto the porch, thinking maybe you'd had a stroke or gotten confused. I started walking toward it, but the closer I got, the further away it seemed to be. It didn't look like it was walking, Elias. It was just sliding backward through the mud without moving its feet. "Did it say anything?" Elias asked, the air in the room suddenly thin. "Nothing. But I got close enough to see the face, Elias. It had your jaw, your hair, that same charcoal sweater you're wearing right now. But when the lightning flashed, I saw the eyes. They weren't eyes. They were black as night, like 2 holes bored into a skull. No whites, no pupils, just empty, oily pits." Julian leaned in closer, his voice a strained whisper. "It just kept staring at my kitchen window, even when I was standing right in front of it. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the reflection of the house in the glass. And then it reached down and picked up my heavy metal trowel from the dirt. It didn't tuck it in a pocket. It just held it against its thigh, and I watched the metal sink into its leg like it was being pushed into deep water." Elias sat back, his skin crawling. A trowel? Why would it want a trowel? It's borrowing pieces of us, Julian said, his eyes wide. It's out there in the rain, standing in everyone's yards, staring at windows and taking things. It's like it's trying to learn how to be solid by stealing our shadows and our tools. Julian grabbed Elias's arm, his grip frantic. Don't go home tonight, Elias. When I finally gave up and ran back inside, I looked back out. It was gone, but there were no footprints in the mud where it had been standing. Just a single, wet charcoal thread snagged on my fence. Elias tried to rationalize it. Julian was under stress. Oakhaven was a small town with old stories, but the incidents piled up. Elias was usually the kind of guy who hit the gym at 5:30 a.m. to stay ahead of the day. Lately, however, the other Elias seemed to be keeping a much more frantic and public schedule. The gym incident happened on a Tuesday, while a gray, rhythmic drizzle tapped against the high glass windows of Oakhaven Fitness. Elias was on the bench press, finishing a heavy set, when Sarah, a regular he'd known for years, walked over. She didn't have her usual high-energy greeting. Instead, she stood by the rack, her arms crossed tightly, looking at him with a mix of confusion and genuine fear. "Hey, Elias," she said, her voice strained. "How did you change so fast?" Elias sat up, wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel. "Change? I've been on this bench for 20 minutes, Sarah. What are you talking about?" Sarah blanched. She pointed toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the parking lot and the wooded perimeter of the property. "I pulled in 5 minutes ago," she whispered. "It was pouring. I saw you standing by the edge of the woods, right behind my car. You didn't have a gym bag. You were wearing that charcoal sweater you always have on. I rolled down my window and yelled, 'Elias, you're gonna catch a cold. Get inside.'" Elias felt a cold drop of sweat that had nothing to do with his workout slide down his spine. And you just drifted," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I started to get out of the car to see if you were okay, but the closer I got, the further back you went. You moved into the tree line without ever breaking stride, like a film being pulled backward. But you never stopped looking at me." She swallowed hard, looking at his face as if checking for a mask. "Your eyes, Elias. They were like black glass. No light, no reflection. And you were holding my spare key fobs. The ones I keep in my cup holder. I saw them dangling from your hand, but as you backed into the shadows, I watched your fingers lengthen and wrap around them until the keys just disappeared into your palm, like your skin swallowed them." 2 nights later, the phone rang. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who lived across the narrow street. Elias had just settled into his armchair, dry and warm under a wool blanket. "Elias, dear," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are you standing on your porch in the rain? You've been out there for 20 minutes just." "Staring at my window." Elias looked down at his lap. "Mrs. Gable, I'm in my living room. I haven't been outside since 5. "Don't joke with an old woman," she snapped, though her voice cracked with fear. "I can see the hole in your sweater cuff from here. You aren't moving, Elias. You aren't even blinking." Elias dropped the phone. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. He crept to the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. There, standing on his own front porch, was a man. Same height. Same charcoal sweater. Same slight slouch. It was undeniably him. The rain ran off its face, but it didn't seem to notice. Slowly, unnaturally, the thing turned its head. Its neck moved with a series of wet, rhythmic clicks, like snapping dry kindling, each sound a violation of biology. It didn't have Elias's eyes. It had 2 pits of flat, matte shadow, absorbing all light, reflecting nothing. It smiled, a mouth that opened just a little too wide to be structurally sound, stretching the skin until it looked like it would tear. And then, without touching the handle, it simply stepped through the locked front door. Elias's frantic 911 call brought the police. They found him barricaded in the attic, huddled in a corner, clutching a kitchen knife. The house was otherwise empty. However, the lead officer, A man named Detective Miller noticed something that made the hair on his arms stand up. In the thick dust on the hallway floor, there were two distinct sets of footprints. Both belonged to Elias's unique orthopedic shoes. One set led from the kitchen to the stairs, Elias's own path. The other set, however, started directly from the inside of the front door. They walked down the hall, stopped abruptly in front of the attic hatch, and simply ended, as if whoever made them had dissolved into the air. Elias moved out the next day, abandoning the house and everything in it. He left the charcoal sweater behind, a morbid tribute to the thing that had haunted him. But his departure didn't end the story in Oakhaven. Neighbors still claimed to see a man in a charcoal sweater standing in the upper window of that empty Victorian, watching the street with eyes that never blink. He's waiting, perhaps for someone new to move in, perhaps for another item to borrow, perhaps, just perhaps, for the real Elias to return, so it can finally become perfectly, terrifyingly solid. Some stories are better left unheard, but you're still here. If you have the stomach for what comes next, click subscribe. But remember, once you do, there is no turning back.